Welcome back, everyone. Today we have a truly disturbing story to delve into. The case of William Kamm, a man who became known as the Little Pebble. This is a difficult one, and we're going to approach it with the seriousness it demands.
Yeah, it's really heavy stuff. Combe, he started something he called the Order of Saint Charbel back in the 1980s near Nara in New South Wales. And it all began with him claiming to have divine visions. Like he was receiving messages straight from the Virgin Mary herself. But these weren't just something he kept to himself.
Right, right. These visions became the foundation of a whole movement. It's just
Yeah.
deeply troubling how these alleged messages, they were used to build this following around these, pretty frightening ideas. He was preaching about doomsday scenarios, the end of the world as we know it.
And right at the center of it all was his own role.
Hmm.
I mean, he claimed that he was chosen to repopulate the earth after everything went down. He was going to have 12 queens and 72 princesses. I mean, that right there is just a huge red flag. Points to some serious delusion and a clear intention to control and manipulate others.
Absolutely. And it is sensitive content, what we're dealing with here. So just to be clear, today we're going to focus on laying out the timeline of events in this case and treating it all with the gravity it deserves. We're going to go through Kamm's actions, the legal proceedings, everything.
I think it's so important to really trace those events to understand the progression of his behavior and why there are still so many concerns surrounding this guy.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Let's go back to the 1980s.
Okay, so back in the 80s, he establishes this Order of Saint Charbel near Nora. And that's when he starts making these claims about having these visions. It's interesting because often these kinds of claims, they're the first step in how these cult-like groups start to exert control.
Right. And it was during this time that he gave himself the name the Little Pebble. That title, I mean, it's so carefully crafted, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It suggests a sense of, humility, but also this hint that he's something special, chosen somehow.
Yeah, it's a very calculated kind of image to project. And it was also during the 80s that he starts to really lay out this doctrine of his. The whole thing about choosing queens and princesses. This is classic cult leader behavior. Promising special status, a sense of belonging. It's a powerful way to create this inner circle and demand loyalty from your followers.
Okay, so then we move into the mid-1990s, specifically between 1993 and 1995. And this is when things take a really dark turn.
This is when we see these horrific acts committed. Two 15-year-old girls. They were living at the compound. And he sexually assaulted them. It's awful, just a complete betrayal of trust, especially from someone presenting himself as a spiritual leader.
And we have to really understand how he was able to do this, how he could get away with these acts. He took advantage of their faith, their vulnerability as young people. They were just teenagers.
Right. He convinced them that they were chosen for this royal dynasty that he was creating. He framed his own twisted desires as something that was divinely ordained, like it was God's will. And by doing that, he was able to bypass any critical thinking they might have had, any doubts. He made it seem like his demands were religious obligations, not just his personal wants. This is sadly a classic tactic for predators.
Then in 2005, a major development, he gets arrested.
Yeah. 2005, Kamm is finally arrested and charged with multiple counts of sexual assault against minors.
And on October 14th, 2005, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Right, 5 years. But with a non-parole period of 3.5 years, and just one of those charges, it was aggravated sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl. When you see that word aggravated in these legal contexts, it means that there were factors that made the assault even more serious. Things like the victim's age, the abuse of a position of trust, all of that.
And this was the same girl who he had claimed was one of his 84 mystical wives. It's just, I'm speechless. The audacity of it all is just astounding. And of course, all of this happening within this closed community he had created near Nora.
And that isolation, that's a common factor in these cases. It lets the leader maintain control, and it really keeps things hidden from outside scrutiny.
So what was the main evidence that led to his conviction? There must have been something pretty strong to put him away.
It's almost unbelievable, but the key evidence came from Kamm himself. His own letters, his diary entries, all addressed to the victim. His own words showed exactly what he had done, his intentions. It's a chilling example of how sometimes these abusers, they actually document their own crimes.
Wow. So irrefutable proof in black and white.
Right. His thoughts, his desires, all written down. Give a terrifying glimpse into his mind.
But this wasn't the end of the legal battles, was it?
Nope, not even close. In May 2007, there were more verdicts.
He was found guilty again, this time of aggravated sexual assault and aggravated indecent assault.
And this time, it was related to another 15-year-old girl. She had been under his influence, too. Again, this just shows this pattern of abuse, targeting young, vulnerable people who are within his reach.
Another young life completely devastated. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. And then in August of that year, he tried to appeal the sentences, trying to get out of facing the consequences.
Tried to avoid being held accountable.
Yeah, but that appeal, it failed. And actually, the court ended up increasing his sentence.
Increased to a total of 15 years.
Yep, 15 years. And his non-parole period went up to 11 years. I think that just shows how seriously the court viewed these crimes.
Right, a much longer period behind bars.
It was. But even then, in April 2013, he became eligible for parole. A chance to get released back into the community.
So what happened at that parole hearing? Did they let him out?
No, thankfully not. They refused him parole. The authorities determined that he was still too dangerous, especially to children.
So he stayed locked up.
He did, until November 2014. That's when they finally released him.
But I understand he was released under some very strict conditions.
Oh, yeah. He was placed under a 15-year extended supervision order. We call that an ESO. And basically it means that after you're released from prison, but you're still considered a risk, they can keep an eye on you, make sure you're not going to reoffend.
Okay, so what did that look like? What exactly were the restrictions?
Well, they put a GPS tracker on him so they knew where he was at all times. He was completely banned from any contact with minors, absolutely no internet access either. They were trying to do everything they could to protect potential victims.
So they took some pretty serious steps to try to protect people.
Absolutely. The main goal was to keep everyone safe. But here's the thing. Between 2014 and 2018, Kamm violated that order multiple times.
Oh man, he just couldn't help himself, could he? What did he do? How did he break the rules?
Well, he was caught using his wife's social media, deleting his internet browsing history, even directing other people to update his blog for him. I mean, he was clearly trying to get around those restrictions any way he could.
So actively trying to undermine the system that was put in place to prevent him from hurting more people.
Exactly. And because of all this, he was arrested again in 2018, right back to prison.
What was the specific reason for this rearrest?
They caught him using encrypted messaging apps. Another clear violation of his ESO. He just couldn't seem to follow the rules. And then, even worse, during his time in prison between 2011 and 2024, new allegations came up. And these were really disturbing.
What were they alleging this time?
This time it was about grooming a young girl. And get this alleged grooming started when she was just 6 years old.
6 years old? How could he possibly be doing that from prison?
It seems he was using his wife, Sandra Matt, to communicate with her, sending letters, gifts, all through Sandra. It just shows how far he was willing to go and how manipulative he was.
So even from behind bars, he was still trying to control and manipulate people? It's unbelievable.
Right. And, the police, they launched an investigation. And they found more evidence, even more details about what he was planning.
What did they find?
Phone calls, journal entries, all sorts of stuff. They were all about his plans for this young girl. He saw her as part of his twisted little cult. It's just so creepy and disturbing. It shows that he's still fixated on this idea of creating this dynasty. So then we come to March 2023. A lot happened that month.
Yeah. In March 2023, the New South Wales police raided his Sydney apartment, and they also raided the Bengali compound where his followers lived.
Right. They were looking for evidence of this grooming and any other illegal contact he might have had with minors. Any violations of his ESO. They were trying to catch him in the act.
And what happened as a result of these raids? Did they find anything?
Well, he had actually been granted provisional approval to return to the Shoalhaven region once he was released. But after the raids and after a lot of public outcry, that approval was revoked. People were understandably terrified of having him back in their community.
Yeah, I can imagine. Protecting the community, especially the children, has to be the top priority.
Absolutely. And on top of all that, 60 Minutes Australia ran a huge expose on Kamm in March 2023. They did a whole investigation.
And what did they find? What did they reveal in their investigation?
Well, they talked to former members of his group, people who had escaped his influence, and they talked about being coerced into these spiritual marriages with Kamm. They also talked about financial exploitation going on within the group. It's just classic cult stuff.
Wow. So they were really shining a light on how he operated.
They were. One of the people who spoke out was Stefanie Hinrichs. Her name had come up in earlier reports.
What does she have to say? What was her experience with Kamm?
Well, she described the abuse she went through starting at 14 years old at that compound near Nowra. She talked about being isolated, being in this environment that was really controlled, almost like a prison. She even mentioned barbed wire fences.
Wow. It sounds like a nightmare.
It really does. And the saddest part is that her own mother, Ingrid, believed in Kamm's teachings. She actually allowed her 17-year-old daughter, Bettina, to marry him.
Oh my God, it's just unbelievable how much control he had over these people. It tore families apart.
Yeah, the damage he caused is just immeasurable. Then, in March of 2024, both William Kamm and his wife, Sandra Matt, were arrested again.
What were they charged with this time?
This time, it was even more serious. They were charged with grooming a child under 14, inciting sexual acts with a minor, and even more violations of his ESO. It just seems like he can't stop himself.
It's like he never learned his lesson.
The police actually said that the evidence they found this time was both sophisticated and chilling. It showed a deliberate, calculated pattern of predatory behavior. This wasn't an accident. He was actively seeking out victims.
And what happened after their arrest? Were they held in custody?
Well, incredibly, in April 2024, Kamm was actually granted bail. Despite everything he had done, he was allowed back out on the street.
Really? But under what conditions? They must have put some pretty strict rules in place.
Oh, yeah. He wasn't allowed to use any internet devices. He had to live at a support center that was monitored and absolutely no contact with Sandra Matt or the victim. It was a long list of conditions. But still, the fact that he was granted bail at all after all he had done is just mind-boggling.
I bet the prosecution wasn't happy about that.
Oh, you better believe they objected. They didn't want him out on the streets at all. But the court decided to let him out anyway. As for Sandra Matt, she was also granted bail. But she had her own set of restrictions to follow.
Okay. And what about the Bengali compound? What's happening there now?
Well, as of 2024, it was pretty much abandoned. Most of his followers had moved on. But, and this is a big but, Kamm still had a following online, particularly in Europe and North America. It's kind of scary to think about.
So even after everything that's come out, people are still drawn to him.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? But that's the power of these kinds of figures. They can be very charismatic and persuasive, and the internet gives them a way to reach people all over the world.
Okay, so the 60 Minutes Australia report we were talking about before, they also went back and looked at how Kamm's movement started.
Yeah, they really dug into it.
What did they find out about his early claims and his doctrine?
They talked about how he first started claiming he could talk to the Virgin Mary, and all about that bizarre idea of his about repopulating the earth with 12 queens and 72 princesses. That was the foundation of his whole belief system. And it's what he used to control his followers.
Wow. And Stefanie Hinrichs, she talked about how she was targeted by him when she was just a kid.
She did. She said it started when she was only 13 years old. She started getting letters that were made to look like they were from the Virgin Mary. It's just so manipulative.
So he was using religion to manipulate her.
Yeah. And in the letters, they told her she would be his next bride. I mean, it's just sick and twisted.
What happened to her after that?
Well, when she was 14, he took her to a motel. He called it a mystical marriage.
Huh?
And that's where the abuse started. It's just horrific. This man stole her childhood.
It's hard to even imagine what she went through.
I know. But she was so brave. She managed to escape from the cult when she was 19. She was pregnant with her son, Killian, at the time. And then in 2002, she actually reported Kamm to the police. It must have been so hard to do that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And the report also mentioned that he violated his ESO again in 2021.
Yeah, after all that time in prison, he was still breaking the rules.
What did he do this time?
He was using Facebook to contact young women. It's like he just can't stop himself.
It's really scary. And what about the incident with the young woman, Pearl Pears, who was found at his apartment? What happened there?
Yeah, that was in 2021, too. The police were called to his apartment because there was an 18-year-old woman there who seemed really distressed. Her name was Pearl Pears. And reports say that she was dressed to look younger than she was. She had been recruited online by both Kamm and his wife. It's just another example of them preying on vulnerable young people.
It really is. So what's next for William Kamm? What are the key dates we need to be aware of?
Well, his EOS is set to expire in April 2025, unless the court decides to extend it, which I think is likely considering all the recent charges against him.
Yeah, I would hope so.
And later in 2025, he and Sandra Matt are due back in court for those grooming charges. So this whole saga, it's far from over.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really difficult story to hear. It's a long timeline of manipulation, abuse, and just so much pain for the victims and their families. It's hard to believe that one man could cause so much damage.
It really is. But it's important that we talk about these things. We need to bring these stories to light.
Absolutely. And we encourage everyone listening to share their thoughts and reactions to this case in the comment section below. It's a really important conversation to have.